Hello, everyone. As Alex said, my name is Matt. And I'm going to do a quick session. Well, I'll say quick. We'll see how it goes. On realistic load testing in Power BI. Firstly, just want to say thanks to Alex and Johnny for inviting me over. I think I first came to this user group years ago when I didn't even know what Power BI was. What really I had no idea about data at all. So to now come and speak here is really great. So thanks very much for having me. Just quickly on who I am. As Alex said, I co-organise the Newcastle Power BI user group. We've been back in person since last January, and it's going really well. We've got some really good speakers coming up. So if you're ever in the Northeast, please do check us out. I'm a little bit of a Power BI nerd and have been for the last few years, and I'm constantly just trying to find ways to get better at it, basically. More recently, I've joined Barrett Developments as the visualization manager. So we're setting up a new data team there, essentially rolling out Power BI across that business. So that's really exciting. And we might be hiring later in the year. So if anyone's interested, do let me know. In terms of today and what I'm going to talk about, oh, I forgot to mention, I also make these T-shirts now. Yes, that is Shakira, which is a new thing too. So that's fun. What we're going to talk about today? Well, load testing. First of all, has anyone even heard of load testing or knows what it is? You people? Anyone done it in Power BI?
Seen it, but not done.
Seen it but not done it? All right, cool. Good audience then. Hopefully you should all learn a little bit about what it is, why we should even care about it in the first place, and then we'll do some demos on how to actually do load testing in Power BI using the realistic load test tool. And maybe we'll break a report or two in the process. And what I'm not really going to cover is things like troubleshooting reports or actually performance tuning. So looking at DAX queries or anything like that. This load test tool really just looks at a higher level. So as I go through it, you'll see that we're not really going to focus on the more visual or DAX level performance. So who recognizes this? It's your performance analyzer in Power BI desktop, right? It's probably the Power BI developers go-to tool if you think you've got a performance problem. You load up your performance analyzer. You might record, refresh your visuals, and then probably if you have a table like this that's just taking forever to load, you might copy that DAX query out and you'll go into DAX Studio or something like that and figure out where the problem is. That's like a common scenario of how you might attempt to look at a performance issue in Power BI desktop. That's not what we're going to look at today, but that is probably your starting point. So performance load testing kind of sits in this family of performance testing. So if you think about web servers or apps, you have all these different types of performance testing, right? So you've got things like spike testing. That's basically where you just hit a connection with a load of traffic in a short period of time. I don't know if anyone tried to get like Taylor Swift tickets for their kids or anything like that last year, but that failed probably because they didn't do enough spike testing. And then you've got other different types of testing. We're going to focus on load testing today, which is very similar to stress testing, but I'll explain why it's different. So I don't know if anyone else played this game when they were at school. It's like a bridge builder game, where essentially you made a bridge using like as few resources as possible, and then you sent some cars or lorries or trucks over it and you saw whether the bridge could handle the load. That's essentially what we're going to do, but in Power BI. We're going to hit a report with as many requests or a predefined amount of requests, and we're going to see how the performance copes. In terms of how that compares to stress testing, well, load testing, what we're doing is we're predetermining the parameters of our test. So we're saying we're going to use X load and put that against our report and see how it copes. And the test we're doing is very much a pass or a fail. And that test indeed is the speed and reliability of that report in a realistic scenario, i.e. your production environment. Stress testing, on the other hand, is a bit like your classic Buckaroo game where you just add and add and add until eventually it just gives up and it fails. So whereas load testing is predetermining the parameters, stress testing, you're testing it until that point of failure. So that's the key difference. And this graph kind of shows that. whereas expected load testing uses an expected load. Stress testing can be an undefined load until we hit that breaking point. So load testing in the context of Power BI, what is it actually going to test? It's going to test the front end report performance. So we're not necessarily looking at the back end queries or even the data set necessarily in much detail. What we're really focusing on is the end user experience. So if I'm a user that opens a Power BI report, does it perform well? And what we're going to do is use a realistic or a couple of different realistic scenarios. So rather than just loading up the first page of our report, we can use things like bookmarks, we can use filters to try and create a more realistic scenario of a user actually engaging with a report. And as I said, what we're not really going to look at is individual query performance or DAX performance. So at this point, you might be thinking, well, why should we care, Matt? Right, I'm already doing unit testing. I'm already doing UAT. I've got all these different types of testing. I just want to publish my report. Why should I then add in another set of testing that I've probably never even heard about? Well, the reason is we want to avoid production pain. In production, we have the risk of users not adopting our product if it doesn't go to plan. We have to think about deployment. So if something goes wrong, what's our sort of hotfix policy? Can we just publish straight to live? What are our rules around that? What are the timeframes around that? And also dependencies. You might have a data set with a performance issue because you've changed it for a certain report, but there could be 5, 6, 7 other reports that also use that data set. You need to think about how they're going to be affected as well. So generally, we don't want these issues in production. We want to find all these performance problems in our dev and test environments. And there's also reasons why these issues might be more likely to crop up in production. We're going to have usually a lot more users in production. The usage of our report in production is going to be more likely to be concurrent, i.e. users using a report at the same time. There could be changes to our data. Quite commonly in our test environments, we have less data in terms of volume, but also just different types. And I don't know about anyone else, but if you've ever sat down next to someone using your Power BI report, they can be unreliable in how they actually use that report, and how well-intended you were when developing that doesn't necessarily translate into how they use it. So that's number one reason, production pain. We want to avoid that. Secondly, we don't know how a report's going to change or a data model is going to change over time. So putting in something like load testing can help you set a benchmark for your performance of your report, which you can then compare to over time as that report and that data set changes. And then lastly, we can actually use this to save a bit of money, because if you're setting off on a big Power BI project and you want to look at something like Premium or even Fabric, it's not necessarily that obvious what level of compute you actually need. So load testing can actually help you answer that question. If you know for your 5, 6 reports that at a SKU level of P2, they all work great for X amount of users, then you know that you could probably go away and use P2. But without doing those tests, it's a little bit more of a guessing game. So hopefully I have convinced you of why load testing is actually important. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually set that up. So a couple of assumptions just for my demo. These obviously could change if you were doing load testing in your own environment. Generally, I wouldn't recommend doing load testing if you know there's already a performance issue in your report. If you know that a visual has been, if the measures behind that visual are written quite badly, or there's just inefficiencies in the way that report page has been set up and you know the issue is there, load testing isn't going to give you any more answers. It's also kind of assuming that we're using import mode, because then what we're really doing is testing the visuals actually loading. We're not testing the queries in a direct query, for example. And we also kind of want to control our environment. So the only thing we're changing is those parameters in our load tests. So things like network latency, or even how well your PC can actually run these tests. You want to try and keep that as controlled as possible. So how do we go about doing that? Well, firstly, you want to set some clear objectives. What do you actually want to get out of the load tests? Is it to set a benchmark for your report? Is it to test it before it goes into production? Or maybe, like I said, you might want to use it as a benchmarking tool for your capacity levels to see what you can actually get away with, or could you save some money? And then once we've decided all of that, we want to define some variables, run some tests, and then analyze those results and use them as a benchmark. How do we do that? Well, there's this tool called the Power BI Realistic Load Test tool, which was a lot of people haven't heard of, which is interesting because it was released in 2019. It's an open source tool. It's available on Microsoft's GitHub. The demo I'm going to show today is it's a 90% identical version of this. I've essentially forked their code and then added a little bit of extra stuff to it, but I can explain that in a bit more detail. So you can go download this, use it in your own environment. It's a PowerShell based script. You don't need to know PowerShell, but you do need to be able to run it in an elevated window, i.e. as admin. And what it's going to do is it's going to essentially spit out multiple browser windows, so it's kind of replicating multiple users hitting your Power BI report at the exact same time. You know, technically we could do that without this. We could all get our laptops out right now and all just keep hitting F5 and see how it copes. But that's not going to really give you any tangible results. What this will do is give you results in as I'll show you, a horribly formatted Excel file. But we can use these preset parameters to actually create benchmarks for this and then interpret the results. So to do this, as I said, you need PowerShell with that admin access. You just need a report in a workspace you can access and a laptop that isn't going to down you if you start opening more than a couple of browser windows. And then lastly, you just need to download those scripts from the GitHub. Easy. So now on to some demos. So I think I'm doing pretty well for time, so hopefully we'll get through all of them. So what I'm first going to show you is how to access the tool, what the actual files in that tool look like, and then I'll show you a quick example, and then I'll show you a bit more of a detailed example using things like bookmarks and filters and things like that. And then I'll touch a little bit on capacity planning. So as I said, first thing you want to do is go to their GitHub and find the load test tool. And in there, it's going to give you, I'm not running Zoom it, which is a rookie error. There we go. It's going to get you a few different files. So you've got 3 different PowerShell files. The setup load test, which is basically where you're going to set all your parameters. And then a run load test, which is where you actually hit the big red button and say, run the scripts. And then the update token you only need if basically you've waited an hour and your access token has run out. And then you're going to get 2 JSON files, one which is just your access token, which basically means when these browsers run the report, you don't need to re-authenticate every time. It's just going to use that access token. And then lastly, your report JSON, which is basically just a parameters file for the load tests that you're going to run. And then lastly, you get HTML, which essentially is just almost like a dummy version of the test. It's going to show what the browser looks like when you run it. So I'll set up a test, and then I'll these actually look like in practice. So I've got a workspace here with some sample Microsoft reports. For example, if we look at this one, if the Wi-Fi allows, this is just like a Microsoft built report. That way, if the performance is really bad, it's nothing on me. Microsoft clearly don't know how to build Power BI reports. So I'm just going to run a load test on this report as a quick first example. So I'm in PowerShell, and what I'm going to do is first of all run the setup load test script. Can you see that okay? And then it's going to run through some questions. It's going to say, how many reports do you want to configure? All right, well, let's just do 1. How many views do you want to generate per report? That's essentially how many times do you want it to refresh. So let's go with, say, 10. How many users do you want to replicate? So in essence, how many browser windows do you want to pop up? Let's just go with, let's go with 5 and see how it copes. And then you can add in things like think time. So what I alluded to earlier in terms of making this more realistic, you can't expect users to be clicking on bookmarks and filters instantaneously. So what you can do is add in a little bit of think time so that it pauses for however many seconds between each refresh. So let's just do 3 seconds. And let's do it's now going to authenticate against Power BI, and this is what's going to generate that access token that I talked about. And then it's going to give us all of the different workspaces we've got access to. So I'm going to hit 5 to use get a load of this workspace. And then it's going to go away and it's going to retrieve all of the reports in our workspace, but also it's going to tell us what the SKU level is for that capacity. And it's kind of storing this in the background. So when I talked about benchmarking at different capacity levels, this is how you could use it. If you had one workspace at a P1, one workspace and then changed it to a P2, for example, you could do it that way. Let's pick our regional sales report, and it's gone away and done all the clever stuff and generated some files for us. So now our test is ready to run if we wanted to. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly show you what it looks like. So in here, what you'll see is it has created a new folder. So every time you set up a test, it creates a new folder. That way it isolates each test from each other. If we open up that, we get our files that we talked about. So for example, if we look at the PBI report JSON, again, what you're going to get is a few different parameters. And if we want, these are the ones that we've set in the PowerShell script where I was asking the questions. If we wanted to, we could go in, we could change this. So let's say we wanted to do 4 users instead of 5. We can do that. And then, as I'll show you in a second, you can also add like report pages. You can add bookmarks and filters and make it a little bit more realistic. But for now, I'm just going to keep it as it is. As I said, you also get a PBI token file, which is just a big long access token, not too much to write home about. And then lastly, this realistic load test, and fingers crossed, if I've set this up correctly, it's going to show me an example of that report in a browser window. There we go. So you can see it looks slightly different, right? We've got our report, and actually you could interact with this as you would in a normal browser window. But we've also got all this extra information up top, and this is all our load test information. So you can see it's stored things like our think time, the number of users. You can see it's now number 4, what the capacity SKU level is. So when I run this load test, as you'll see, it will update this based on all the refreshes, and it actually automatically record the refresh times for you. So that's what it's going to look like. Let's go ahead and run it. So now I want to run the run load test script. I'll just zoom out a little bit. Now, by default, if you just run this PowerShell script, it's going to iterate through every single test that you've set up in this folder. So all of these that I've sort of pre-set up before, it's going to run through every single one. I don't want it to do that. So what you do is you take the folder name that it's created and you just pass that as a variable like that. And then hopefully it's going to ask us one last time just to make sure so you don't kill your laptop. How many instances do you want to initiate? We said 4, so let's do 4. And if the demo gods are with us, we should get 4 different browser windows popping up and emulating a load test. Hopefully. As you can see, it takes a little bit of time to actually open the windows, but what you should see, if I just focus on one of them, that it's going to iterate through some refreshes on that report. And if you look if you can see in the top, I don't know if this might pause it, we're recording each refresh that happens, each individual refresh, and then it's calculating an average for you. So as it iterates through, you'll see this average probably go down a little bit as it's kind of using the cache. But the important thing about this is it's getting it's almost like a real life scenario of if you had 4 users accessing this report all at the same time, which is quite hard to do without some sort of automated tool, especially recording the results in this way. Did I get 4? Yes, I did. So I'm just going to wait 2 more seconds for that to finish. In the meantime, has anyone got any burning questions?
So you already mentioned that you can do obviously filters and slices over there. I'm just wondering, is there a way to do it in a way that it doesn't sort of sequentially? So a real user typically goes, if you have 5 filters on the left side of the report, they will go through the hierarchy, select one, the other, and the other, and each of them actually puts on additional load on the capacity. But that's also more representative of how it actually gets used. So if you put up filter or a slicer configuration in there, would it just go straight to it, or would it go one by one?
I'll show you, but essentially it doesn't. It's not intelligent enough to. You can't put a hierarchy or a sequence of filters in there. What it will do is iterate through them. So if you put 2 different report pages and then a bookmark and then 3 different slices, it will essentially iterate through every combination of those until it runs out. But obviously you're pre-specifying how many times you want it to refresh. Every time it does one of those actions, that counts as a refresh. So if you set 2 bookmarks and 2 different filters, it will do a bookmark and then do a filter, and then the other filter, and then the other bookmark, and the first filter, and the second filter. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's just how it works. So that is all finished. If I hit enter, it should close those down for me. And as I said earlier, what you'll get is a really lovely formatted Excel file. Yeah. All in one cell. Don't you just love it?
Power query will nail that then.
I'm glad you said that, because that's such a lovely segue into the pre-made Power BI report I've built, which has some Power Query steps, which iterates through all of that and then gives you a nice result at the end. So now you can see we've added a new test to our data. This isn't probably the best Power BI report you could build for something like this, but it's an example I've come up with. So you can see here I've done some tests before, and you can record things like how many users did you do it for, how many refreshes were you doing it for, what was the average refresh time. You could even put like an SLA in here. So if you say I need it to load within 5 seconds, you can build that in and see which reports aren't passing that SLA. And you can see quite quickly here that for some reports, upping the concurrent users doesn't actually make that much difference. And then for some of them, such as that regional sales one, when I upped it to 25 users, I ran this last night and did 25 browser windows, almost broke my laptop. It took 20 seconds on average. So you can see how a report that works quite well just on its own when you're refreshing it, but then as soon as you up the concurrency of the requests, it doesn't work so well. So I promised I would show you how the bookmarks and the filters work. So let's just, rather than set up a new test, or will we? Let's set up a new test. So I'm going to do a new test, but this time for, let's just do 2 users to keep it quick. And this time I'm going to use a slightly different report, and I'll show you how to implement bookmarks. So again, it's just going to go back, find my report. you do have to run this setup script every time you want to run a new test, even if it's for the same report. So that's set up a new test. If I go have a look at that one, yep. So in here, what I'm going to do is add in some bookmarks. So you've got this bookmark list here. Hopefully you can see that. So what you can basically do in here is just comma delimit some bookmark GUIDs. Easiest way to do that, go find your report. Let's use this one. And thankfully Microsoft pre-entered some bookmarks for me. So let's have a look at them. This graph here, they've got two different bookmarks, which shows either I think it's the last 12 months or the last 12 weeks and then the last 90, and that's going to change the data in that chart. If you then look at the URL, you'll see it's entered a nice bookmark GUI for us at the end. So all you need to do, copy that, go into your file, enter it in, and then if you want to look at the other one as well, just flick to that bookmark. Probably a nicer way of doing this, but there you go. So we've got two different bookmarks that's going to iterate through. We could also add some filters. I think I've pre-made this because I can't be bothered to type, and if you will watch me type out this horrible JSON. But essentially, you can specify what table, what column, is it a slicer or not, and then a list of those different filters. So if I just copy all of that, add it to my filters area, hit save. Now, what I've done in the past when I've done this demo is just go straight to running it, and then it's failed, and I've looked like an idiot. So I'm going to check. So if we open up our HTML now, we should be able to check that it actually works okay. Looks good. And you can see here, it's entered our filters and also one of the bookmarks, I think. Yeah, there we go. Now if I go and run this, it's just the same one. No, it's not. Put this in. We did 2, didn't we? Let's just run that. Hopefully now, what you should see if I just expand one of these, that's going to iterate through not only the bookmarks, but the slices in the bottom right. So you can see it's flicking through the different slicer options. It's also flicking through the bookmarks. And therefore, this is quite a simple example, but you could generate a more realistic scenario of how a user navigates through a report, especially if you had like a landing page and then you had certain pages that they navigate to. I didn't show you how to add a report in, but essentially you just add the report page GUI into here. So that's that. Let's stop this test. Okay, so those are the two sort of live demos. For capacity planning, I've got a pre-recorded one, and that's simply because I've run out of Azure credits and I can't really show it. So if you've ever looked at capacities, on the left you kind of got the Power BI Premium, different SKUs. SKUs, right? I'm going to get this right. SKU, whatever. On the right you've got like the Fabric ones. You can actually go into the Azure portal, and I'm going to show you an example if it wants to work. So let's say you've got a workspace that is currently just using, you've just got a pro license, so you're not on a capacity, and you want to test a report at different SKU level, but you don't have premium. What you can do is make use of the embedded capacity in Azure, and temporarily set up a premium like capacity. Has anyone ever done this before? No? So you can go into Azure portal, create a Power BI embedded capacity, add it to your resource group, give it a name, and then when you click on the change size, what you'll get is all the different SKU levels, and you'll see how much they cost per month. And you'll probably go, I can't afford that. Or my boss is not going to let me play around with that. If you drill into the pricing calculator webpage, though, what it does give you is an hourly pricing instead, because you're not going to leave this on for a month, right? You just want to do a quick test. So if you have a look at that, then actually you can run like an A1 for 0.8, what's that, 80, yeah, 80p an hour. You can run an A4, what was that, like £8 an hour or something. So if you're just literally running this for 10 minutes, you're not really going to build up that much cost. So once you've done that, you set up your Power BI embedded capacity, you can then change it on the fly. So we put it in A6, which is 23k a month. So
pocket change.
yeah. This is why I ran out of Azure credits, right? So you start the embedded capacity. It started. Now, if I go back to my workspace, come on, Matt, get back, and give this a little refresh. What you'll see is you should now have a embedded capacity available. There you go. Don't know how well you can see that, but trust me. There's and then you assign your license capacity, hit apply, and now all the reports in that workspace are on that new capacity. So just like that, you've added a premium capacity temporarily. You can then go in, run your load tests based on that capacity level. And then I'm going to skip ahead because you've already seen this. That's not what I wanted, but you get the idea, right? You can do that. And then, did I add a little bit extra? No, I didn't. You could then run that at like an A3 or an A4, and then you could run it again at another level, and then you've got your benchmarks, right? You can compare it against, if you wanted to, all of the different SKU levels and see how your report copes. So that's all the demos. Hopefully you kind of understand how the tool works. It's fairly straightforward. Even I understood it, so it must be. Some considerations, because it's not a perfect tool. Things you need to think about when doing load tests. First of all, how good is your estimate in terms of what a realistic load is? You know, you might think, oh, well, I've got 50 users of my report, therefore I need to run a load test for 50 people. Probably not, right? Because what's the chances they're all hitting the report at the same time? Unless they've got like a morning meeting where they're all literally sat there opening it. So have a think about what a realistic load actually looks like. Make sure you capture all the relevant queries. Obviously, I showed a couple of examples using bookmarks and filters, but there might be more niche sort of navigation through your report. Like you said, you might want to try and set it up in a way that you have that kind of sequence. Make sure your machine is good enough. I think this is
good enough for you, or good enough for the end user you're trying to replicate?
Your machine good enough for your load testing.
Okay.
Yeah. Generally, I've found I use a 16 gig RAM laptop here. If you go up towards like 50 browser windows, it's going to start to complain just because you've got so much open on your machine. That's when you might want to consider using virtual machines to really control the environment you're using. And also have a think about how realistic your test environment is, like how similar to your production environment is it in terms of data and capacity and things like that. Fabric capacities are out now, as I said. There's some really good stuff in this article about things like compute smoothing, which I am not clever enough to understand, but definitely is worth considering when looking at load testing. You've obviously got the Fabric capacity app, which can show you a lot of the information about what's happening in your capacity, which is a really good tool to use to complement load testing. In terms of other use cases, you could run it to see what it looks like from different users' perspectives based on their RLS, to see if you've got access to this region, but they've got access to the whole data set, how does the performance change? You could look at it in terms of regression testing. So like I said, benchmarking your report pre and post a significant data set change. How much does the performance change? And then something that I would love to look at is DirectLake mode in Fabric. You can now switch in your data set between DirectLake mode or direct query mode or automatic. I think it'd be a really cool idea to test those 3 different settings with load testing and see how it actually changes. Some limitations, obviously it's a local tool. You have to download the scripts and run it from your machine. Probably someone clever could put this in a cloud and do it that way. You could do cool things like if you have pull requests in your Azure DevOps or other DevOps environment, you could link your load test runs to your pull requests to say, right, I'm pushing this change. Here's the load tests I did. It looked like it was good. Proceed. You could run it in combination with SQL Server Profiler to get how the backend is actually looking when you're running these load tests. And then you can contrast and compare the front end performance with the backend. And then lastly, as I mentioned, there's loads of opportunities with Fabric. So just to wrap up, hopefully you learned a little bit about what load testing actually is, why we should care about it, and how to actually do that in Power BI if you so desire. As I said, my name was Matt. If you've got any questions, please grab me after or ask now. These are all my socials. All of the information and the slides, the tweaks to the load test scripts are all in my GitHub. Go have a look at them. And then, as I said at the start, if you're ever up in the Northeast, please do come along to the Newcastle Power BI User Group. It'd be great to see you.
It's quite a strong Newcastle accent you've got. I really struggled to follow you.
Oh, man. But yeah, thanks. That's it. Was there any questions?
Just on caching. This tool looks great. I need to work out how to get that into the thing, but I've got a report currently which I've been working on performance improvements. But once you've got a cache response,
yeah,
it responds really well. Now, this is possibly not to do directly with what you've done there, but clearly what you know about performance is that cache response for me personally, or is that for anyone who's looking at the report? And also, how long does that cache last for? And how do you reset the cache to reset your test?
Yeah, good question. If anyone didn't hear, the question essentially was, how does the cache work, and how do you reset that in the context of this? So the cache is personal to you. And correct me if I'm wrong. So when you open a report and you do a couple of selections, and then you open up again, it should be quicker because it's saved that cache for what you've done. In terms of the load testing, it will obviously, the first time you, each browser window, you can see that as a different person opening up that report and running that query. So the first time it's going to be cold. Once it refreshes through, it gets the cache and uses it. That's why it's worth running at least 10 to 15 refreshes, because you get a better average. If you did like 2 refreshes, generally the average will be a lot higher because your first one will be a lot slower than the rest of them. But obviously, if you add in things like bookmarks, filters, slices, that's going to change the query you're accessing. So that will also get you a better and more realistic results.
You would. I've had some support from Microsoft recently on sort of best practice, and apparently by applying bookmarks, actually caches some of it pre-caches some of the responses.
Yeah.
So once you've got those bookmarks in, if you're putting the bookmark to do your stress test, you're actually you're caching that response. It's going to be more responsive.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Cool. Anyone else got any questions? Just grab me after. Cool. Thank you.